Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 7, Episode 3. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, recorded live in person in New York City at the Lead Innovation Summit on a boisterous show floor, Ophelia Ceradini, formerly Vice President, Digital Technology and Innovation Group at Estée Lauder Companies, online.
Yeah, well, this is, we got a little bit of a curveball here, I believe, as best as I recall. This is the first time we've had a guest leave their position in between the time we recorded the episode and the time it's coming out. So Ophelia has just recently moved on from this position, but it's still a great interview. Mm-hmm. Part of what we wanted to do is really showcase the innovation process at a big retailer that has successfully continued to churn out a lot of new products, a lot of innovation across a really broad portfolio. So great conversation.
And speaking of live interviews, you and I will be live together again in the Vantage Podcasting Studio in Las Vegas at Grocery Shop coming up mid-September. Looking forward to that. And we've already got some great guests and some panel discussions lined up. So it's going to be just a pile of fun. So let's get right into the news. So, you know, there's some information from the Census Bureau and stuff like that, kind of macro stuff. But we've touched on that a bunch of times. And we were talking off mic. There hasn't been any kind of meaningful change. So I thought we'd skip right ahead to earnings. Now, speaking of skipping ahead, there's a lot of earnings that came out from our disruptors and the DNVBs, but maybe you can give the audience a bit of a hint of our next episode coming up.
Yeah, well, just in general, it's been a big couple of weeks for retail earnings, and the next week or two will be true as well. But we had pretty much all the major so-called disruptor brands, the Allbirds, Warby Parker, et cetera, report. But partially in the interest of time, but partially because next week's episode, we're going to be revisiting the so-called profitless prosperity of disruptor brands. So I thought we would talk a little bit about what's happened most recently with those brands in the intro to next week's episode. So a bit of a tease.
So let's move ahead. Clearly, the big news is back and forth between Walmart and Target. They're both putting out results. You see Walmart being very optimistic, particularly around grocery. You see Target being less optimistic, maybe because they've got, more discretionary goods. And of course, the lattes at the curb are getting some profile and some fun, which
apparently not enough.
Apparently not enough. But we had a hint of that last season where we interviewed Senior Vice President of Target, who was telling us that was a very popular thing. So what did you make of the news between Walmart and Target?
Well, this is a real face-off because Walmart and Target are generally, I mean, they're huge, obviously, so they're kind of representative of many things that are going on in retail. And they both reported, I guess, within 24 hours of each other. And it's pretty clear Walmart was the winner in this battle. Walmart had sales up close to 6%. And their e-com business was actually up 24%. And we haven't seen those kind of growth numbers from most retailers recently because of kind of the moving around of the growth there. And they actually raised their guidance. To contrast that with Target, Target had its first sales decrease for a quarter, and I think it was 6 years. So that's not great. Their profitability actually improved. They made some progress on getting their inventory levels down, which has been a concern for a while, and taking some expenses out. But they were not able to move the top line very much. And I think there are a few things going on. One, Target dealt with this kind of pride backlash, which was really twofold. First, you had the people go after them for promoting pride, which I think is, such a nonsensical sort of issue. But also then they got the other flip side was when they kind of backed off a bit, then people that were in favor of showcasing pride within retail weren't too excited with Target. So it's kind of a PR nightmare for them. And they call that out as an issue in terms of their sales. But I think there's more to it.
That feels like a red herring to me. I don't know. That feels like a red herring.
I believe that it's a contributor, but I think the broader issue has to do with really what we're seeing across a lot of spectrum of retail, which is the essential goods are the ones that are performing particularly at the lower price point. So Walmart, even though Target's certainly a value-oriented retailer, Walmart clearly owns the low price position. The other thing I think really importantly is Walmart's strength in grocery. Target certainly has a big grocery business, but they're much more reliant on other more discretionary goods and home and apparel, which are challenged categories. So I think it's the product mix. I think a little bit of this pride backlash. I also don't get the sense that Target's maybe executing as well. Small sample, but I've been in a bunch of Target stores recently, seen a fair amount of out of stocks. So I think there's a bunch of things going on. But in any event, in the head-to-head comparison, Walmart clearly performing better than Target, and then Target lowered their guidance. So I think at least for the next few quarters, it looks like Walmart's in the driver's seat, at least relative to Target in particular.
Now, speaking of Walmart, one of our recent guests, some news out of the Walmart organization, Judith McKenna, president of their international division, has announced she's leaving, replaced by the president of Sam's. So some big changes at Walmart. That's a big role, and she was a fantastic guest. So I'd certainly encourage everybody, and we'll put a link in the show notes to go have a listen to that episode. It was a real great interview. Let's talk about the home improvement sector. Home Depot put out their results, and I think Lowe's results come out this week, so to speak. So we don't know them, but we can suspect that with the heat off from the buy forward from the COVID era and all those things, that they would be not dissimilar to Home Depot. What did you think of the Home Depot results? Any takeaways from that?
Well, they continue to be weak. One of the things we do know, even though we're not going into a deep dive on the Census Bureau data, is that the home and big ticket categories continue to be among the weakest sectors. So Home Depot is down about 2%. A lot of the companies, whether they're showing sales increases or decreases, have clearly been focused on taking expenses out and getting their inventory down. So we're not necessarily seeing efficiency. Yeah, year of efficiency. So Home Depot, I guess, not unexpected, but they had a 2% sales decrease. I think about what they reported, and they said they expected to be down in the mid single digits the rest of the year. So not a particularly optimistic outlook, but I think you're right. Lowe's has probably come in about the same place.
On the other side of the equation, or the ledger, I guess TJX and Ross had some very strong numbers. Where do you think those numbers are coming from?
Well, again, I think this is a lot of the flight to value. One of the things you can tell from the Census Bureau numbers is that department stores and especially apparel stores generally continue to be showing declines. So we'll see. We've got Macy's, Kohl's reporting. We'll talk about that, I guess, the next news segment that we do. But I expect their numbers will be negative. But here we have TJX and Ross both showing sales increases. TJX, which includes Home Goods and Marmaxx and the TJ Maxx stores, they were up about 6%, as well as showed profit improvement. And Ross Stores was up about 7% and also showed profit improvement. So I think they're benefiting from a lot of good inventory availability and ability to attract customers to those lower value price points. And so I think we're seeing a big shift from the more moderate priced players down to the value equation. And it's just kind of where we are, I think, in this cycle, this macroeconomic cycle.
I'd love to get your thoughts on the Tapestry Capri merger. Tapestry also released some earnings that were not spectacular. So for those who don't know, Capri, is it Capri or Capri?
Capri. Well, I think the Italians would say Capri. So the Americans would probably say Capri Holdings. Yeah, Capri Holdings is, for those who don't know, it's Michael Kors, Jimmy Choo, and Versace are the three big brands. And then Tapestry is Coach, Kate Spade, which I have some history with because we owned Kate Spade when I was at the Neiman Marcus Group, sold it to Tapestry, and then Stuart Weitzman. So yeah, Tapestry and Capri.
2x the market cap, right? But well below the 2014 high of $20 billion. Are they catching a falling knife here? What's your assessment?
Well, I think part of what is going on, these are really brands that for the most part are more North American centric, as opposed to say, Gucci or Chanel that be much more global. And, it's the part of the market, this so-called rich session, which is, we are seeing some of the very top-end brands doing relatively well, though their fortunes are kind of tied more so to China, which is continuing to be a little
not
bit of a shaky recovery. But these kind of accessible luxury brands are not doing great at the moment. And so, yes, the values are down this seemed to be a pretty good opportunistic buy on the part of Tapestry. I think mostly what we're seeing is consolidation. I think, when you have a market, not just the accessible luxury, but some of these other markets that we continue to come back that aren't fundamentally growing, then the question is, how do you show revenue growth and how do you go for efficiency? And I think because of the similarity in the customer base for these brands, similarity in the wholesale customers, ability to leverage, e-commerce infrastructure, those kinds of things, manufacturing, product design, that this is much more, kind of like when Macy's was rolling up all the regional department stores. It's not fundamentally a growth sector. It's really about consolidating market share, leveraging economies of scale and scope. So opportunistically, I think it makes sense. It's hard to really see this as a growth story, though. I think it's, once again, kind of a more defensive operating leverage kind of move as opposed to something really interesting strategically.
Let's talk about the WeWork bankruptcy. So, listen, at one point, WeWork was writing checks to big companies who had a lot of empty space. Remember, they cut a big check for like almost $1 billion to Hudson's Bay for their their Lord and Taylor building. It seems like, the money from the Saudi sovereign wealth fund is gone. I'm betting they wish they had that $975 million back they gave the Newman. I don't see good things coming out of this anymore. And I don't think they're going to save downtowns, which are also struggling from the office. So there's a lot of news wrapped up in this announcement.
Yeah, I think, it's not a retail story per se, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I think, and I know we've touched on this a couple of times, one of the biggest risks I see just generally in terms of what could affect retail is whatever is going to happen in terms of commercial real estate more broadly. So we already know because of work from home, because of higher interest rates, that there's a lot of risk in commercial real estate, not only the office building segment, which is obviously what WeWork plays in, but I think over time more broadly with shopping malls and other types of retail. So to the extent there's already a lot of risk in commercial real estate, the potential for a WeWork bankruptcy and potential liquidation would be very significant in many cities. So it sounds like they're pretty close to filing. So who knows? Maybe by the time this comes out even, they will have filed, because I think this is, very much of the moment. And then we'll see what happens. Are they able to reorganize under bankruptcy to be a smaller company that has a chance of making money? But this has been a train wreck for multiple years. And I think it's just going to very likely to add to the troubles in commercial real estate, which will clearly have ripple effects in the economy more broadly if it gets much worse.
Let's finish off with something about the grocery sector, since we're heading to grocery shops. So we've been paying a bit more attention. I pay a lot of attention to it. But grocery online down 7% year over year, which kind of took some people by surprise. And then Aldi's picking up Winn-Dixie, which is probably something to do with Albertsons-Kroger merger. What did you make of this news in the sector?
Well, with regard to the Aldi Winn-Dixie thing, I think kind of like we were talking about with Tapestry and Capri, a lot of excess capacity, you could argue, and consolidation going on in the grocery world more broadly. So I think, as stores get jettisoned by some and there's just more pressure to try to compete, we'll see what happens with Amazon's additional moves there. There's just, I think, going to be more consolidation, more pressure on cost reductions and so forth. The online grocery thing is interesting. Longtime listeners or even more recent listeners will know that every once in a while we do these encore episodes, and including a couple we've released in the past month, which are doing very well, by the way, which is nice. But in deciding which ones to broadcast, because we now got this big back catalog, I've been going back and listening to some episodes that came out 18 months, 24 months ago. And in several of these episodes, we've talked about whether this huge spike that we witnessed in 2021 in online grocery was going to persist. And as you may recall, Michael, we were pretty skeptical. Not that we wouldn't reach a newer level, but the general belief that was that a lot of the online grocery growth would slow down or start to revert, partially because customers were doing it out of desperation, being fearful of going into grocery stores and those kinds of things. But also the economics were so terrible that there would be some shakeout. And this is very much looking like it's playing out, because online grocery, while it did jump to a higher level, the growth rates in the past few quarters have been flat to down. So we'll see how this sorts out. But I have to say, I'm not terribly surprised. I'm also just in general noticing that a lot of the curbside checkout places at Target and others are almost always pretty much empty, or one or two cars. So I think we're just getting back to a more normalized level, higher than pre-COVID, but not anywhere close to the acceleration a lot of people predicted.
Yeah, it's not Peapod all over again, but it is also a leveling of that playing field. So there you go. So for the folks, we'll keep an eye on that, and no doubt we'll be talking about that in Vegas to all the folks at in and around Grocery Shop. I'm sure that'll be a big topic of conversation. All right, let's get to our excellent interview with Ophelia Ceradini from Estée Lauder.
Well, it's our second interview live from the floor of the Lead Innovation Summit. So we're surrounded by lots of people, but the most important person is Ophelia Ceradini, who is joining us just moments, I guess, really after getting off the stage. So welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here and talk to you guys.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you as well. So we generally like to have a little bit of an introduction so people listening know who you are, a little bit about what you do. So could you just tell us a little bit about your personal and professional journey?
Sure. Well, I guess my personal life, what can I talk? So I'm a native New Yorker, grew up in Brooklyn. I mention that because I think that kind of shapes you, where you've grown up, especially because now I've moved to the suburbs and it's very different and kind of shocking for me. So, anyway, we'll go on to the professional part. So my journey, I really have experience in many different mediums. I started on the digital agency side, worked in print and in packaging, and then went on to digital. Then I worked on the brand side for Estée Lauder, the brand, and then moved over to Estée Lauder Companies, working across brands within the online division. So I would say a key accomplishment there would be to lead the strategy and the development of our digital platform, which included developing our very first websites, our very first mobile sites, and then that really was the foundation to build our multi-channels experiences, which include like social channels, retail, third-party platforms, pure plays, etc.
Sure.
Then I went freelance for a couple of years, and then they pulled me back.
Pulled me back in,
and I lead the Digital Technology and Innovation Group. So what that means is we build consumer-centric experiences that are innovative and differentiating. Could be bringing in new business models, new capabilities, new and emerging technologies, or maybe just reimagining experiences.
So interesting. I'm kind of curious about your experience of Brooklyn. So I went to Williamsburg for the first time this week and wandered around, and I was like, wow, I've been hearing a lot about it. Does it surprise you that suddenly there's this part of Brooklyn that's become like the place where the brands, like I went into the On Running, they opened a new flag, everybody's opening a flag. I saw all these prestige brands going in there. Is this shocking to you? Like, how do you think of it?
So it is shocking. So I live in the suburbs now, but I do keep my apartment in Williamsburg. So I have an apartment in Williamsburg, but I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. So and that experience, so I love Brooklyn, and I think that people from Brooklyn that are really from Brooklyn, we all have this kind of culture of and love and nostalgia for the way that things were. So now it's a little bit more trendy. A lot of new families move there. And it's great now, too.
So
I love it now.
It's a whole meme, the Brooklynization of New York, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole meme. So, Estée Lauder, very familiar brand to absolutely everybody, but not everybody's always familiar with the scope and the scale, as you say, Estée Lauder, the brand versus companies.
Right.
So give us a few seconds on how big the brand is and how many brands under the portfolio. That gives us an idea of your scope and just the scope and scale.
So Estée Lauder Companies is the #1 prestige luxury beauty company, right? We have over 30 brands, and we are across the categories of hair care, makeup, skincare, and fragrance. We're in 150 plus countries. We have 60,000 employees. We have some legacy brands like Estée Lauder and Clinique, and then we have some newer brands like DCM and Dr. Jart.
So let's talk a little bit more about both what you do from day to day and maybe a little bit about what you just shared with the audience here. So can you give us a sense of how you approach the innovation process, what some of your goals, what the vision is for that, and just, kind of behind the scenes as to how you do your job day to day and where you're aiming?
As far as like how the approach, I believe that the approach is not you think about this like one technology and then you go with it or something like that. So what we do is we really do research about consumer behavior, evolving consumer behavior. What are consumers, how are consumers shopping, how are they intaking their content, etc., which has been evolving tremendously, especially over the past few years. Also technology. What is the technology adaptation? How accurate is this technology? Looking at new technologies, I might partner with someone who's developed a technology to make it custom for us. There's different ways to go about that. And then thirdly is really about what's going on in the world, which is really super impactful to the different ideas. COVID was extremely impactful, right? We really went right into live video selling because of COVID and the hyper-personalization things, which we can get into. Or it could be about saving the world, sustainability, or diversity, inclusivity, or there's wars and inflation and things like that. Those factors have to also be taken into account. So we think of all of that as we develop our ideas. That always, of course, ladder up to the strategy of the brands and the company. And then we have a test and learn framework. And the test and learn framework is about having a hypothesis and a desired result with KPIs, right? But it's also about empowering the teams to be able to come up with any ideas and not be worried about the risk of it.
Right.
So our test and learn framework, so what we do is we'll develop, we'll come up with the ideas and we'll say, okay, this one we're going to launch. We have a roadmap, but we'll launch an idea and we'll do it in one brand, in one market. We build an MVP, and then we test it with consumers and with our different KPI and analytics to see how it does. If it does well, we'll move it into product, where we'll rebuild it with all the requirements for the scale. If it doesn't do well, we might pause it, iterate it, or put it to the side. But having a real innovation as a discipline allows you to be able to expand and come up with really great ideas without that fear of failure.
How do you, I love that, and how do you even get those ideas to the initial, because I imagine with the scope of your business and all the different types of consumers and all the different go-to-market strategies, there's a lot of different ideas that could be brought forward. How do you even decide which ones get to that initial MVP kind of stage?
So there's a few different ways. So we will think about it as okay, there might be a strategic area where we're okay, we need to win in makeup or something like that, and we'll go towards things like that, right? Or it could be we have this great idea or new capability of technology that lends itself naturally to use cases that would be beneficial. There's many different ways to go about it, but I'll give you a real example just to show you. So we looked at consumer behavior for trends, right? So consumers now, they're so savvy, the beauty consumers, they know a lot about the different ingredients, about different products, about what's trending. They are on social, and they're very, very savvy. And so they capture all their information, then they'll go to sites to purchase, right? With that consumer behavior, also, obviously, TikTok. I mean, I know I have a daughter, and if it's on TikTok, she'll want something, and I'll be how did you hear about that? Well, TikTok, of course, right? So, there's all these
your new
things.
brand creators, right?
Exactly.
Some are thinking about it. The innovation's happening in some ways in this crowdsourced media.
Right. So, obviously. So then we're okay, but we've always had trend reports, but there's a lot of manual labor into doing something with that trend and putting it out there. And so that's the hard part. So we said, okay, let's come up. So sometimes there's a problem that you're solving,
right,
or an opportunity, or a gap in the journey, right? So those are other ways that we go about it. So in this, like, we know it's important, but it's very difficult to be on a monthly basis, be able to take advantage of these things that are trending, right? So we aggregated all of the trends from the different social channels. So we had a feed that was here are there's hundreds, but we'll be here are the top 10 trending looks or trending products, right? Then we'll take that feed and use AI to match it to our products and shades that match it, and a feed of user-generated content. All of that together to build an experience that really takes advantage of what's trending in an automated way. So we took out a lot of the manual labor, being able to do that on a monthly basis and be able to go live with that and really just take advantage of what's going on in the world, how consumers are looking at beauty.
So interesting. Now, you've got a scale and a size. Your resources are, some would say, almost unlimited. They're never really unlimited. But does that also introduce some complexities in your process? I mean, we're talking about rapid iteration when you're thinking these TikTok trends. They don't last weeks, they last days.
Right.
So on the one hand, you've got tremendous resources, as you were just describing, to marshal all these things and pull them together. On the other hand, are there complexities that come about by your scale and scope and size and how you need to take it to market to make it make sense for you guys?
Right. Well, I would say we don't have mammoth amount of resources, like you said, but yes, the scale. So when it comes to innovation or any of the ideas, another variable is that it has to be scalable. So we don't do one-offs. We want to be able to be scaled across brands and globally, right? It can be for skincare or for makeup, but it would be a scale, not a one-off. So that is one complexity that has to be considered. And then from a technology standpoint, it has to also be good enough and have the ability to scale, right? So some technologies aren't there yet. And so you just sort of have to wait for it to catch up.
Right.
So there's that complexity. And then, so there is the complexity of having that requirement of scale, right? And then the other complexity of it is there are many stakeholders, many brands, many leaders, many stakeholders. And so there's also that complexity.
Right. As I've spoken to folks from your organization before, and it's, as you're overseeing the companies, each has their own distinctive brand owner and brand voice, and they have a very a very specific path for their brand. So it's interesting how you would intersect with that. That's fascinating stuff.
Could I maybe just circle back to the innovation process or innovation effort in total? So I get, and I've worked personally on a lot of processes to try to, sort through the ideas and put them through gate posts and, fail fast and, all these other kinds of things that I think can be very, very helpful in the innovation process. What I'm curious about in particular is really the cultural aspect. And one of the things that I've often talked about, and some of it is working at a couple of the companies that I did, where I felt like even if we had a pretty good innovation process, fundamentally the culture was wired to say no, as opposed to wired to say yes. More likely to try to defend the status quo as to put themselves out there. And that came down to both, the way decisions got made, resources got allocated, but it was also kind of the way people behaved. Like, yeah, you're telling me we want to innovate, but, if I do this and it doesn't work, I ruin my chances to get promoted or what have you. So I'm sure you know generally what I'm talking about. Yep. I'm just kind of curious whether, how you support that culture, on top of just here's the process, here are the mechanics, here's the budgeting, here's how we decide to scale or stop.
Right. So you're right. You really do have to have that culture. So part of the discipline is about getting buy-in from those key stakeholders and leaders, right? I'm lucky in that our leaders do want innovation and really support how important it is to be innovative and always have great experiences for our consumers. It's about having consumer experiences that is high touch, developing things that then consumers cannot live without, right?
Right.
And so if we're working towards that common goal, it's also easier, right? And having that support, so for sure. But then after that, it's about also having your stakeholders be part of the process and part of like what are the KPIs for the pilot, and agreeing upon that.
Right.
And then also agreeing upon defining the failure part, right? So maybe it's about numbers. Maybe you say, I'm going to make this part up. There's 10. There's always hundreds of ideas, but maybe there's 10 you're going to refine. Then there's maybe you're going to do pilot, like launch live with 3, and the expectation is that 1 will be that golden, will be the golden nugget that you scale, and that the other 2, it's fine.
Right.
And so, like, if everyone agrees on whatever that numbers is, that also makes it a little bit easier, and everybody's on the same page on what you're going to do.
Yeah, I think sometimes I see too many companies, including some I've worked for, where you sort of decide you're only going to get behind one big idea, and it's kind of an all or nothing proposition, as opposed to saying, we're going to try 10 stuff, and like you say, you're going to winnow down, and hopefully get to 1, or maybe that one's not quite right, and we moved on to a related thing. So,
but if you don't, you can lose out on that great experience.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's so true. So let's maybe shift a little bit, though it's certainly related, to some of the things you were talking about on stage here at the Lead Innovation Summit, and this idea of hyper-personalization, which I think we probably all, we understand personalization, we understand hyper, but what do you mean exactly, and you were talking about in your efforts?
Right. So, well, just to set what so let's just define personalization and then hyper. So personalization, it's table stakes, it's foundational. It's kind of like what Amazon does, right? The algorithms are based on your past purchases. It's macro segmentations, people that are like you bought this, things like that. Those are must-have personalization type of things. Hyper-personalization, so what it means to me. It means making a consumer feel unique and heard. So the content that we give her is about her as a person, as a unique person. So, and what that means for me, there's 2 ways to go about it, is doing the hyper-personalization in the moment, and then there's more long-term that requires data and AI. We'll get to that. So the hyper-personalization that we're have just launched is about using technology, AI, AR, etc., and being able to analyze your facial features. So when it comes to like your eye shape, there's like 12 different eye shapes: almond shape, monolid, unilid, etc. And we'll analyze that, your face shape, your lip shape, etc., to be able to put a look, like let's say we're talking about makeup, a makeup look on you that's specific to your features, and then the tutorial is specific to your features, so the content, the tips, everything is specific to you as a person. And then the product recommendations are specific to you as a person. So that's one form of it. And then we could take on the trends and be able to do trending looks and things like that. It also is about diversity and inclusivity, because we could do your skin tone, determine what your skin tone is, so that we can give you the right foundation and the right look that is good for you. And also we could do it with skincare. So that is in the moment. So you could do hyper-personalization in the moment when it comes to content, product recommendations, etc. More long-term is about data and AI. There's a wealth of data that we have, but I think we need our infrastructures to kind of catch up to be able to say, okay, let's take all of this data and use AI for all the future use cases that we have to really have a personalized experiences that really takes everything into account.
Interesting. It's funny. Back in the 90s, I don't know if some of our listeners would probably remember the one-to-one future, one-to-one marketing was this idea, Peppers and Rogers Group, of the future is going to be built on, creating these one-to-one relationships. And I think they were probably 20 or 30 years ahead of their time. Now it seems like a lot of this is starting to happen. But part of the reason I bring that up is one of their premises was that, you try some stuff, the customer gives you feedback, or you glean information from the customer on top of whatever you also know and the technology you bring to bear. Is there much, and the way you think about hyper-personalization, is there much kind of give and take, information exchange that informs how you take the personalization to the next level?
Right. So that's more of a long-term strategy. So like I said, there's a lot of data, and there's a lot of data to be had, right? So it's not only these are your facial features I can give you in the moment, kind of like recommendations, but then there's also so many other things, right? There's culture, there's people's view on sustainability, and like all of those different things, right? So personal preferences. And sometimes people don't even want that. They want like what's trending and things like that, right? So there's so many different factors, and so it's like you said, it's a give and take to be able to figure out what the consumer wants and then give that to her, right? Especially in a digital way, because when you're physically with somebody at counter, that's different because you're there, you're reacting to somebody in person, and what we're trying to do is have a similar experience but virtually.
Yeah. So so interesting. It sounds the potential to be very powerful, and it's really exciting to see how these technologies are converging to bring some of these ideas to life. Just kind of zooming out, the beauty category, huge, dynamic, hard to keep track of, I think, in a lot of cases. So how do some of the shifting dynamics, you mentioned COVID is had an effect, obviously, but also just the explosion of social media. We talked a little bit earlier. Like, how do you keep track and try to sort out what's going to matter in the future and then dial that into your, I guess, more longer-term strategy for innovation?
And we've talked about that in the context on the pod of table stakes versus differentiators, and so I just wanted to pick up on that.
Right. I mean, it's
what you got to do now, and of course that's a moving target in and of itself.
Right.
What table stakes, what used to be a differentiator becomes a table stake. So it's a topic we've explored a bunch of times.
Yeah, and I think maybe to be more specific about it, it seems, and maybe this is just a fluke of the moment, but I think it is definitely a longer term trend that innovation and certain trends are just happening faster and faster, and sometimes come out of we were talking about the metaverse all the time, like a year and a half ago, right? Nobody was talking about generative AI. Now it's generative AI. TikTok was non-existent a few years ago. Now it's
let's talk about Threads.
Platform.
Let's talk about Threads. 100 million
Threads,
users.
Nobody had that bingo card, right? So I guess I'm just thinking about when you've got such a dynamic world, and it seems like social media in particular is incredibly important to the businesses you're in. How do you make sense of that? Or is it just inherently you build in agility to be able to, you don't know where to go next, but you just build this agile platform to be able to respond?
Right. So there's a few ways. It's not, there's no right answer to that, really. You have to think about a lot of different things. So one is there are goals and a strategy for the company. So that's one thing that, will always be there and that you have to take into account. So there's that. Then, yes, technology, the things that trends, there's FOMO, like metaverse, and things like that. And so you really, some things you might want to be like first to market, right? There's other things where you might be like, I'm not really sure about that one. I'm going to wait and see, and then see what happens with it. And then, you can move into it maybe later, right? So that would be like a metaverse one. The Gen AI, I think that it has a lot of great use cases. I think that one is going, you also have to use your instincts, right?
Sure.
That is a big part of things. Like, what do you instinctually think is going to be, that great thing that you really need to pay attention to and start, working on.
And your experience, right? You've been doing this, and I'm sure your team is staffed with people who, A, are kind of wired to think about innovation, and B, have been doing it for a while and kind of see what works and what doesn't, right?
Yeah, well, it's a mix, There's experts in beauty. They really know beauty,
right,
and they really know the consumers that buy beauty. Then there's experts in technology and innovation that and blue sky thinkers, and you kind of need a mix of everything. And then there's the business side of things, right? Well, you have to have the business case, you have to have the KPIs, right? And so I think if you have a team that has a mix of all of these different skills, you kind of even each other out on making the best bets.
All right, well, let's try to bring this home. So I'm curious, when you think about, let's say, just the next year, what's one or two things that you're most excited about that maybe we haven't touched on? Or is there something that are like, oh my God, this just makes me frightened that I don't understand this, or
keeps me up at night.
Yeah, it keeps me up at night kind of thing.
So I think what I'm excited about is I would like to bring it all together. So been working on a lot of different focus areas I talked about. There's hyper-personalization, there's trends, there's AI or Gen AI, there's data, there's video, live video we didn't touch upon. And I think that these things tend to be a little bit more like siloed. I think that I'm excited about the possibility of maybe bringing it all together as one harmonious, seamless kind of an experience.
That's interesting.
And also, so that's one thing, is like bringing it all like as one big experience and not as like you have to choose which one you feel like going to.
Pick
and then
your
the
own
other
adventure.
one, right. And the other thing is I believe the future is multi-channel, meaning it's not that a consumer goes to a brand site and I'm good, I have a brand site or something like that. I think that the consumer behavior is evolving to like, I want to see a brand experience wherever I choose to see that experience. And that could really be anything. There are so many like channels out there, and it's wherever she or he wants to see that experience. So I think your strategy has to be like multi-channel experiences, not like I'm building it once. Oh, oops, I better do that one over here too, or something like, like that.
Right.
I think those two things are like where I'm like kind of thinking about.
All right.
Yeah.
Anything scare you? Anything keeping you up at night? Other than the
I would say,
crazy heat in New York City
we were
today?
talking about this a little bit earlier, and transformation a little bit scares me because I want innovation to be part of transformation or lead transformation, and I'm not talking about just consumer-facing like experiences like I do, like in finance, in supply chain, in fulfillment. I feel like there's a lot of transformation going on, but I think if you don't put your innovation roadmaps in there, then you're going to have to keep transforming because you're not like thinking ahead.
Right. Interesting. Well, listen, Ophelia, thanks so much for joining us. It's a busy day. We're here at the Lead Innovation Summit, and I couldn't think of a better place and a better guest to have at an Innovation Summit than someone leading innovation of your caliber and experience. So thanks for sharing insights and wisdom with the Remarkable Retail Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
All right. Safe travels.
Thank you.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our great episodes, including our recent interview with Carrie Baker, President, Canada Goose. And be sure to drop us that 5-star review where you listen to your podcast. It really helps us spread the word.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategy and innovation consultant, keynote speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me at stephenpdennis.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.